Okay, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon since it's 12:03. My name is Trina Shanks and I'm the Director of Community Engagement here and a professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a person wearing glasses. I have short curly hair. I'm wearing a green dress with a green and white scarf. Just a quick note about accessibility. You can hit closed captioning at the bottom to show subtitles or live transcription. And that should allow you to be able to read the captions. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can toggle between gallery view, speaker view. So you can either see the PowerPoint slide and just the speaker who's talking as opposed to everyone if that's distracting. But really, I'm just excited to introduce our session today. It's an exciting and special session describing how capitalism and lack of labor protections affect our society, culture, and health. And a note to the students who are in the Engage community class who are officially taking this class for credit, and our panelists, please make sure to stay on after the official session for a debrief once the presentation ends. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to give a brief land and labor acknowledgement. Engage is very aware that we function within a society that has a deep history of exploitation, stealing both land and labor that has affected and shaped Indigenous and Black communities for generations. We are committed to acknowledging this in everything we do to try to help make a more inclusive tomorrow. So I'm going to pause for a second to give you an opportunity to read this land and labor acknowledgement. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our Engage team. So Sonia Harb is our Detroit engagement strategist. Aisha Ghazi Edwin is program manager and adjunct lecturer and kind of Fatima Salman is our Engage program manager. Leslie Long is our new Engage field intern. And Cleon Walsh is our continuing field intern. And if you want to see any of our past sessions, you can go to our website. But with that, I'll hand it over to Aisha, who will be moderating today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Aisha Ghazi Edwin. I use the pronoun she, her, and hers, and I have Black hair and I'm wearing a black blazer. And that's something that we do just to make the session more accessible for everyone. It's also recorded in our transcript. So as Dr. Shanks described, this is a special session exploring how capitalism and lack of labor protections affects our society and our culture and our health. And we have some amazing guests joining us today. So please join me in welcoming Dwayne Wells, who is the Executive Director of the Economic Justice Alliance of Michigan, Beatrice Klokpa, who's the founder and owner of WellMind, and Karen Tyler Roots, who's the Executive Director for the Center for Community-Based Enterprise. So next, I'd like our panelists to maybe just say, take maybe a few minutes and please share your name, your pronouns, identifiers of what you're wearing, and a little bit about your organization and its work in this topic. So Dwayne, why don't you start us off?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dwayne Wells, and I, as Aisha said, I am an executive director of the EJAM, the Economic Justice Alliance of Michigan. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his, and I have short black hair. I'm wearing glasses and a dark red collared polo shirt. My organization, EJAM, is really a coalition of grassroots grassroots organizations that are engaged in leadership and development and advocacy to build working class power. So we were involved in the 2014 and the 2018 minimum wage ballot initiatives and the 2018 earned paid sick time ballot initiatives as one of the convening organizations and gathering signatures, et cetera. We also run an economic justice fellowship program that over 8 months teaches participants the principles of organizing, how to do a power analysis, how to build campaigns, and assist them in their movement building work. Happy to be here. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dwayne. Welcome. Beatrice, why don't you go ahead?
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Clopa, and I'm the founder of WellMind. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am the founder of WellMind. WellMind is a company that offers corporate solutions for mental health in the workplace to reduce toxicity in the workplace, to reduce turnover and absenteeism, all of these things that impact corporate workplace culture. And what WellMind does is we shift workplace culture by strategic solutions. I'm excited about this conversation, and I'm looking forward to engaging further with you all. Thank you.
Awesome, welcome. Thank you. Karen, why don't you go ahead?
Good morning. My name is Karen Tyler Ruiz. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a brown-skinned woman wearing a green shirt with a black sweater, glasses, and a short buzz cut with a little bit of hair over it on the top. C2BE, the Center for Community-Based Enterprise, we've been around since 2007, and we've really been working to grow and strengthen cooperative businesses and community-based enterprises, which I'm going to define in just a minute, including those owned by members of historically and underserved communities. We provide legal, business planning, marketing, employee training expertise in order to help create living wage, locally rooted jobs through employee ownership. So our vision overall is a more inclusive economy that engages more folks in Detroit and Metro Detroit and beyond, anchored by a supportive network of additional employee-owned businesses. I'm going to say a little bit about this name that we chose way back when, the Center for Community-Based Enterprise. A community-based enterprise we defined as a company with a sustainable revenue model, locally rooted, provides broad equity ownership. That means there's agency in the organization, pays living wages, and then shares resources with other CPEs. And I like to just define that because it's not a term that still is in the local choices of folks. We use the word community-based organizations, we use the word social investment, social enterprise, but we chose this term specifically because it has all these components of it. And we, in this time of pandemic, if folks have been looking for an alternative to the way we've been doing business in our nation, this is an alternative. It's been around for a long time, particularly in the Black American community, but it's time to take a look at it, dust it off, and really lift it up again and say, wait a minute, this can actually work. So I'm really excited to be in this conversation because this is exactly the whole capitalism and the consumer piece. This is what we do. We try and move an alternative to traditional capitalism business.
Awesome, thank you and welcome. So, before we get started, I just want to kind of set the stage and share some information. So, many of you probably know this, but the US is one of the most overworked developed countries in the world. About 134 countries in the world have set laws restricting the maximum length that someone can work during a week, and the US has not. We are one of maybe a few countries in the entire world who has no maternal leave policies or paternal leave policies, no guaranteed policies. So that means if you give birth, your place of employment doesn't have to give you any time off. And here in this graphic, you'll see other countries around the wheel and how much time parents will get off. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about today have to do with maternal leave and paid sick time and the need to raise, the federal minimum wage, and kind of the racist history as well of some of the labor exploitation that we have in this country. To kind of set the stage, I want to ask specifically Dwayne, can you talk a little bit about your organization's involvement in trying to raise the federal minimum wage and why it's important?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we were involved in the two on the state level. We've been involved in two ballot initiatives where we've collected signatures to get placed on the ballot, an initiative to raise the minimum wage. Once in 2014, which was passed and did result in an increase in the minimum wage, and then in our 2018 ballot initiative. We collected the appropriate number of signatures to have it placed on the ballot. It was certified by the Board of Canvassers, and then the legislature that was in place at that time adopted the legislation, which is in their purview, so that it was not on the ballot. And then in the lame duck session that followed after the November election, significantly gutted the provisions of the ballot initiative as it was originally worded. So for instance, in the original ballot initiative, we were supposed to go to $12 an hour by 2024. And instead they amended that to extend it out to where we would not get to $12 until 2030. So for instance, this year, just in January of this year, the minimum wage did go up in the state of Michigan from $9.65 to $9.87, which was a 2.2% increase. But when you compare that to the inflation rates that I've seen annualized that are 7-8%, you can already see how working class people that are low wage workers are not keeping up. In fact, they're falling further and further behind. So we are involved in the federal discussion to raise the wage act. We always thought $12 was a pathway to 15. The polling that we did for the ballot initiatives told us that $15 would not be successful. So now we are definitely part of the raise the wage and are working and educating voters and our constituents on really the need to do that.
So, and the federal minimum wage is still $7.25, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Which has not kept up with the cost of living or inflation.
Not at all.
Not
and
at all.
then the tip minimum wage, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, at the federal level is only $2. It's still $2.13 an hour. So for tipped workers, there's an even larger gap. Michigan has a higher, but not much. So tipped workers are allowed to be paid a lower minimum wage with the thought that their tips will bring them to the minimum wage. But we do know that is not happening in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And this kind of leads to like burnout and feelings of, you're not being valued in your workplace, let alone you're not able to meet your basic needs, right? And we also know that this lack of kind of raising the federal minimum wage disproportionately affects Black individuals. 38% of Black people would benefit from raising the minimum wage versus 23% of white workers. So, given that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the history of the SubMinimum Wage, which I think only guarantees about $2.50 an hour for someone who has a tipped job or a job where they can receive tips at. Is that correct?
$2.13. So there are 14 states and Puerto Rico that still have a $2.15 minimum wage, and then it ranges up from there to, as I mentioned, Michigan's is $3.67 an hour, all the way up to states like California, which have said that have eliminated the tip minimum wage, and so their minimum wage is the same for tipped and untipped workers. So it ranges. Currently in Michigan, it's $3.67.
Wow. And so that's something that your organization in this ballot initiative is trying to work on.
Yeah, we'll try to eliminate that tipped wage, the tip minimum wage, and allow workers to earn a minimum wage and be able to keep their tips.
Yeah. So, to set the stage kind of for the rest of the conversation, I want to really talk about how capitalism and its toxicity is really rooted in kind of racist ideology, right? If you haven't read or looked at the 1619 Project by the New York Times, I really encourage you to. It talks about how capitalism really began on the plantation and how it measured people's value, based upon their bodies and their unit of production. And then the history of tipping is after the Civil War ended, the country was trying to maintain ownership over Black people's bodies and their descendants. And because of that, they invented the tip wage system, which is similar to a strategy called sharecropping. And we can send some information on that in the show notes. But basically, the tip wage system allows for kind of continued exploitation of, and back then it was formerly enslaved people. Now, it's a lot of different people, and people could still legally be paid nothing. So we know that it has these racist roots, right? And it's still around, and it's affecting everyone now. So one of the other things is that disproportionately service workers who have these tip wage jobs are women, and about half are people of color. And then what ends up happening is those individuals, when they try to get tips, are also subject to a lot of gender and race-based discrimination. They end up getting less tips for kind of doing the same work as white servers or white tip earners. And then also females routinely have to deal with sexual harassment on the job. So I know that we talked a little bit about the efforts, Dwayne, around trying to get rid of this. Do you think that the tipped, the sub kind of minimum tip system is something that we can repeal eventually, or at least in Michigan?
Well, I certainly hope so, and we're certainly working toward that in the Raise the Wage Act that's active at the federal level now. There is an elimination of that tip wage to bring the one wage for all workers, but I think it's going to take. People have to see the economics of it and understand. And states that have done that, like California, Minnesota, I think Washington State, New York State, I believe, and others, that it has not resulted in increased unemployment or significantly higher prices. So I think it's about continuing to educate and show. And I think COVID has sort of highlighted and really lifted that up. It's like, who is an essential worker and what do people really need to be able to provide for themselves and their families and care for themselves and their families when you talk about things like, paid leave and time to take off to care for yourself or others if you're sick. Because for a lot of, restaurant workers and other low wage workers, if they don't have those benefits, they end up going to work sick, perhaps making their condition worse than it would be if they would have had a day to take off and rest and recuperate. So yeah, I think it's going to take a concerted effort, but I'm certainly hopeful that we'll be able to get to one fair wage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So even though this conversation is going to be really centered around policy as well, I also want to talk about what it's actually doing to people and how our other panelists are seeing it do, the impact of it to people and to communities. So this is, for Karen or Beatrice, how have you seen the lack of maternal leave, paid sick time, low wages? How have you seen it affect individuals and communities? And how is your organization trying to combat that?
I'll go ahead and let's Beatrice. Go ahead, Beatrice.
Go ahead, Karen.
Our organization, well, let me back up. There are two types of institutions that protect workers' rights in the United States right now. One is unions, and the other is worker ownership, employee ownership of your own business. That's it. In terms of really that are in place in its institutions historically to protect them. And we all know that there's been a precipitous decline of union folks in the United States. It's gone down Since I've got data here from 1983, the decline was about 20.1% in 1983 of the population. And you have to understand the numbers of folks in the workplace has grown to, or at that time in 1983, it was about 88.3 million folks in the workplace. Now we're over 133 million in the workplace. And the unionization has gone down to about 10%, that's approximate. So we've seen that happen. So our organization is about creating more worker owner entities that are businesses that change the dynamic in the workplace, right? To protect workers at the end of the day. That's really one big role of it, because the workers are the owners. There's lots of ways that you can do that. I'm not going to go, that's a whole about how you can do it, but we look at cooperatives as one way. The majority types of ownership is a different way through pension plans in the United States. There's more IRS work there. We're actually supporting something that's a little bit easier and an easier lift for smaller retail organizations or things that are under, less than $10 million in gross revenue, right? So because that really gets at our community of Black and Brown folks, LGBTQIA folks, we're really focused on that. But the idea is if you're a worker and an owner, you have agency in your organization to combat the things that Dwayne just talked about. Wages, you set those wages, right? In the pandemic, we have already shown, the data shows that worker-owned entities are resilient, more resilient than traditional businesses, because you're involved in decision-making. A worker owner doesn't lay themselves off. They innovate a solution about how they make it through the pandemic together. And that might look different from business to business, but you're sorted out. I'll stop there. So Beatrice wants to say something. I want to give her time.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for that insight. I'll speak on this from a clinical perspective. So I'm also a licensed mental health therapist. And one of the things that I have seen with individuals when they are not given, if they're not given maternal leave or adequate maternal leave or paid time off, sick time, things of that nature, what I have found is that people become very stressed and feel like they're boxed in. And what we all know is if you put a cat in a corner, that cat is going to come out scratching, right? And that's the same nature that we have as human beings. Individuals become extremely stressed. And that stress not only is perpetuated in their personal lives, but at work, their productivity decreases. They start calling off and really not caring if they're not getting paid to be off either, right? It's that the ends no longer justify the means for them. And so you see this ripple effect with individuals' health and their well-being being impacted, but it's also showing up at work. But that also results in the employers pushing even more. More pressure is coming down from corporate management, expecting productivity and the numbers to increase. And at that point, it really is not sustainable or even reasonable to ask of an individual when they don't have adequate time to be able to take care of themselves or their family members. And so from a clinical perspective, that is what I've seen, because I've as a therapist, I work with individuals in the private world who are corporate employees, but I've also done corporate mental health work as well. And the issues are the same. Yeah.
So it's
now,
oh, go ahead.
I just realized that you had one more question, and you mentioned, how is WellMind offering a solution to that or trying to help with this problem. And specifically what WellMind does is our strategies are to help shift workplace culture by encouraging employers to normalize the talks about mental health, about work-life balance. And we do that through our 15-minute talks called Introspective Moments. And I'll speak a little bit more about that later. But that is a huge part of WellMind's contribution to a corporate culture, is that we help shift it from being one that is focused on driving productivity, right? We know that that's important and necessary, but also we help organizations get in the business of taking care of their employees' well-being as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's fascinating, Beatrice, how, policies that aren't actually helping production are still the ways that companies just think that we do business, right? even though it doesn't help the bottom line. The more you overwork workers, the less time off you give them, the less paid time off, the less productive they are, the more turnover there is. And there's a cost. Every time a company loses an employer, they have to spend money and time training someone else, right?
Yeah.
So this question is kind of specific to you. What do you do when you go into companies and you try to help them see that light and shift their mindset and shift their practices?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aisha. So the first thing is identifying that employer's pain points. And we do that by having various conversations with leadership, but also with the employees. We may do that through surveys and just general conversation, but it gives us an idea about what is going on for this company, right? And then once we're able to identify that, then we offer our solutions and we cater. We don't only have solutions, but our solutions are catered to addressing the problem specifically for that workplace. So for example, our introspective moments, these are 15-minute emotionally intelligent talks that are geared towards shifting workplace culture. Whenever we do these talks, these are not blanketed talks about dealing with stress, right? Work-life balance. Our well-mind therapist or coach is very much integrated with that employer's culture. So we speak to the pain points that are actually existing in that workplace or in that department or team that we're speaking to. And the introspective moment is geared to address that. But not only that, but give the employees, give them things that they can walk away with so that they can work on themselves, develop more introspection, and build their emotional intelligence, because corporate spaces or workplaces are only as healthy as the individuals that are in them. So yeah, that's how we've been working towards shifting that and helping employers move in a better direction.
We have some questions in the chat.
Okay.
I think one was about how do we really define adequate maternal leave? Nicolette, would you like to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for the opportunity. As I'm, sitting here with my child in daycare and my home literally looking like a hurricane and expressing milk and watching this wonderful training, like all at the same time, I'm really wondering, within workplace cultures that value productivity over people, how do we determine what adequate maternity leave or parental leave is when we live in a country where it would be like an amazing victory to make sure everybody was allowed 12 weeks of paid time off. And that just feels like such a bare minimum. My kid's going to be a year and I don't know how to keep doing this, so I think that's just something I'm interested in exploring.
Yeah. Do any of you want to kind of jump in? I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking, I can relate to what you just shared, because I also have basically a new baby. I think a lot of it is about kind of shifting our culture and the way that we value and think of parenting. But, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. What comes first? We first change policy, which will change culture. Do we have to shift culture and then policy will change? It's a difficult question. But similar to it, I want to talk about paid sick time off. It's not completely similar to maternal time off, but it's an important issue. And I know there's been several campaigns in Michigan around it. Dwayne, do you want to talk a little bit about paid sick time off, what it is, and what your organization has done around advocating for it?
Sure. So the earned paid sick time ballot proposal that we worked on with others in 2018 would have required employers of a certain size, I believe it was 50 employees or more, to offer their employees a set amount of sick hours per 40 hours worked. And again, just like the one fair wage, the appropriate number of signatures were obtained and certified. And then that initiative was also adopted by the legislature and then amended to, I believe it raised the number of employees, it reduced the number of hours, so significantly gutting it from the original intention of the act. So since then, we've been part of a coalition called the My Time to Care Coalition that includes other organizations who worked on both this and the one fair wage. And we've been engaged in advocacy efforts and working with the legislators to really get that appealed. And to get the laws put in as they were originally input. But for all of the reasons that Beatrice and Karen mentioned, I mean, that having paid leave is an important benefit for most of them, whether you're a young parent, whether you're taking care of an elderly caregiver for an elderly family member, or whether just for your own self-care and health. I mean, the ability to have time off work to care for yourself and others, I think is an important component of what we consider to be a quality job.
Yeah. And, you know, paid sick time off. So basically it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dwayne, but in 2019, Michigan passed the Paid Medical Leave Act, correct? So that would allow 1 hour of sick time for every 35 hours worked, up to 40 hours per year. So essentially, it would be time that you get off if you're sick, and you'll still get paid for it. And I think they lowered the standards so that employers with 49 employees or less is not subject to the act.
Right, exactly. But I guess the question I would ask along with that is, when you set these policies, even though it's not the policy, where's the enforcement? Because there has to be enforcement to make sure that employers are doing that. I mean, going back to the minimum wage issue and the tipped wage, there was a study of where the Department of Labor investigated, I believe it was 9,000 employers, and found that the overwhelming majority of them, I believe it was 84%, were not making sure that the tips and the tip minimum wage brought them up, employees up to the minimum wage. So if there's no enforcement and sort of accountability built in around the policies, then they are certainly less effective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. Where is the enforcement? So this slide is from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows kind of over time the proportion of people who receive paid sick time, whether they work in the private industry or civilian workers or state and local government. We see the private industry is, you know, significantly less. It's an interesting issue, especially now that we're in the midst of a pandemic, right? Because we know that paid sick time could really help to keep the country healthy. If there's a contagion and people are allowed to work from home and given time to recover, then there's also savings for the healthcare industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other benefits that we see is there's less turnover, there's more productivity. So it's definitely an important issue. And Dwayne, do you know why the 49 employees or less is not subject to the act? Was that just kind of an arbitrary number that was chosen?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they came up to the number, but I guess they didn't want it to be burdens, you know, thinking that smaller employers would have less capacity to be able to offer that and have the coverage, and, you know, without a significant financial impact. I'm thinking is the reasoning behind it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to jump in, and I know our organization, we're not changing that policy. You said the chicken of the egg earlier, and I would say we're sort of the chicken, meaning our organization is focused on working to make folks first aware that there are options. The young woman that spoke about being a new mom just recently, there are companies out there, they're employee owned. You might want to do a little bit of research, because that might be some place where you want to work. Then you might have a little more agency there over some of these questions, depending on how it's structured. But just to make people aware that they exist. Again, the majority of them are pension plan owned, and we are pushing more worker owned, but both of them provide opportunity to weigh in on these pieces. The point I really want to make is, in contrast to traditional businesses and corporations, a worker-owned model or employee-owned model has an accountability loop that begins and ends with the worker. So again, chicken or egg, we're talking about the chicken. Okay.
Karen, could you give us some examples of these worker-owned kind of initiatives or businesses or models, just so like people can really get a clear picture of what you're talking about?
Sure. I'll go up high and then come down low. Internationally, most nations, cooperatives are a big part of who they are. It's cooperative business structures. It's everywhere. It's like how we breathe. It's in the United States where it's almost invisible and you wouldn't even know that they already exist. Historically in the US, a lot of the cooperative work is inside of agriculture. There's way more now, but just I use that to try and focus folks just to get started. So things like the dairy industry, Land O'Lakes. Land O'Lakes is a giant cooperative of farmers, right? They have come together a long time ago. They started this way back in the 1930s to figure out how to market all of their stuff as one. So it's a whole bunch of disparate farmers marketing their butter, their milk, and it's called Land O'Lakes, but you know that, right? Ocean Spray Cranberry, another giant agricultural cooperative. They all produce cranberries. They figured out how to market together. Their aggregate was better than their individual. So that's how they come together. So just to give you a sense of that's what's already in the ether that we don't even think about, those are cooperative. So bringing it down to a more local level, we have focused on what's happening right now in our own communities. So Pingree Detroit Manufacturing is a startup manufacturing company. They are a cooperatively owned, and all these issues that we're talking about, they have figured out how to work that into who they are. And they're still small, they're still growing, but you can start figuring that out early. You don't have to wait for the policy, you create that policy. Another big company US wise, I keep going like this just to understand, Publix, that's I think one of the biggest pension owned companies in the US. I think they have 86,000 workers. And they, during the pandemic, did all kinds of different things in order to manage their employees by using some of that employee input to figure out how they continue to thrive in the pandemic. So that's the biggest thing, you figure it out. Our own small, tiny organization that's doing all this work, we use methods that are brought in from the cooperative community. We've decided how we manage through the pandemic. We figured out how we're going to do our hours. We figured out how we do when we're sick. We do that as a group. We have agency in our organization to make those decisions, so we're not waiting on a policymaker. So again, that's a lot of stuff to say, but again, looking at corporations and actually doing a little research to figure out who's already there, you might want to think about being a part of that, or if you're an entrepreneur, thinking about joining the ranks of getting one going.
That's so interesting, Karen. Thank you. So actually, I was also wondering along that line, can you give us some examples of cooperative kind of businesses in the Detroit area that you're working with?
Yeah, so I talked about Pingree, that's one. What we're doing now is focusing a lot on existing businesses so that there's an opportunity for the business owners to actually sell the business to their employees. And that's what we've been focused on right now. There are, on the east side, there's an organization, Sister Pie is in the process of trying to do that kind of work and convert. They already had that kind of culture, and it just made sense to do that. We worked in the past with Zingerman's. Zingerman's didn't want to be a cooperative, but they have a wonderful culture, and they wanted to figure out how to pay their employees or give them more equity. So we helped them figure out a system of how they can support the extension of the Zingerman's family of businesses through employees being the entrepreneurs, and how to reward them, and then also how to give profit shares back to the employees, right? Without becoming a cooperative, which is why we use the word community-based enterprise, because you don't have to structurally, legally have to be a co-op to do co-op like stuff, right?
Right.
So those are a couple just names that you might be familiar with in our local community.
That's great, Karen.
This is Dwayne. I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in as a board member of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. We
Thank you,
are
Dwayne.
partnering with Develop Detroit to open, and we just had a meeting yesterday. So we'll be closing soon on the Detroit Food Commons, which will include the Detroit People's Food Co-op organization, which will be a true co-op model, and it will also have space for food-based entrepreneurs that want to scale up their businesses, as well as community meeting and convening spaces. So look out for
Thank
that
you,
announcement
Dwayne.
shortly.
Beatrice, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I actually wanted to make a comment on something that Dwayne had mentioned earlier when he spoke, which was about the accountability portion, right? If these policies were to change, who would hold employers or companies accountable? And I think that would be a very interesting solution to come to. One thing that comes to mind for me, I think, is making the change in these policies public knowledge. And not just I don't think it should just be the responsibility of the employer to communicate that, but even from a global perspective, right? Like this should be broadcast on the news, where a lot of people ingest a lot of information about changes and policies that are happening in our world. I think that will be important. And the reason why I say that is because, for example, employee assistance programs. Companies are very strategic about not front loading and promoting employee assistance programs, right? A lot of this is a service that is readily available to employees to access at least 8, sometimes 10 sessions per issue for free with a clinical therapist. But companies are incentivized not to do that because of the pricing model that they have agreed to with many EAP programs, which would, the more that employees engage in the EAP program, the more that it's going to cost the company, right? So again, I think that there still needs to be some shifts in the way that employers are thinking about even taking care of their employees. Employee assistance programs and wellness programs in general, from my perspective, is a way for employers to say, I got a stamp on that check, that service has been offered, right? But I mean, there's no effort or push to really incentivize employees to access the service so that it can really reap the benefits that it's intended to have in the workplace. And so I think, for me, that brings up a lot of these other things that happen on the business end that individuals would not be privy to, and that would actually incentivize the employer to not inform their employees about these policies that are accessible to them, which is why I say the solution to be to make the policy changes accessible and spoken of on a global level, rather than leaving the responsibility just to the employer to do so.
Right. Like, how do we incentivize companies to be driven to keep their workers healthy and mentally well, as opposed to like just getting as rich as possible, right? And even though, it would be hard to do that, but if companies could see the connection between keeping your employees mentally well and production, maybe there would be more apt to. But see, I want to go to a question in the chat, and I think it was from Ryan. Ryan, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about, I know you mentioned the $12 per hour minimum wage is your current goal, with that hopefully leading to a $15 per hour wage. Would you just like to see that grow with inflation over time, or would you like to see that get even larger? And then another question I had was, I know you wanted to talk about kind of phasing out tip-based minimum wage. Would you be okay if like a tip-based minimum wage slightly below a minimum wage, or would you like it to be set at the minimum wage? And the reason I asked that is because I know that tip-based industries can be a little bit of an incentive. Like, I know certain restaurants that give tips, that's an incentive to work there over the minimum wage, because you can end up actually bringing home more than the minimum wage. So I would just like to ask your opinion on that. Thank you.
I'm assuming that was for me. Well, to the first question, yeah, as I mentioned, when we did the ballot initiative in 2018, we did some polling, as you often would do before, and some focus groups to get a sense of what the reaction is going to be before you invest the resources in doing it. And our polling told us at that time, again, this was 2017 into 2018, that $15 an hour we would not be successful in getting the required number of signatures on the ballot initiative. So we said, and there was already a fight, the fight for 15 group and initiative was already in place at that time. So we said, well, we see $12, if we think that $12 could get through, that would be a pathway. I don't think the thinking was at that time, and I had just joined the agency, so I wasn't involved in the pre-work, that 15 was the end goal, but our 12 was the end goal, but it was a path to get to what we think is a livable wage. Now, I know one of our partner organizations, Rock Michigan, the Restaurant Opportunity Center, has done some research to say even $15 an hour, which we are currently sort of pushing for through the Raise the Wage Act, is still not enough. I mean, there are employers now who we know are offering, $17, $18 an hour. So, but we felt like we had to go somewhere. So I would definitely like to see the minimum wage sort of index to inflation somehow, or to make it where people aren't falling further and further behind in high inflationary times like we're experiencing now. And then for me personally, I just think because of its origins and how the whole tipped wage, I am really a proponent of one fair wage for all workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Beatrice or Kieran, do you want to add anything in there?
I'm just going to add something that's just personal. This will show my age, but just out of high school, I was waitressing for $2.50 an hour, which was that tiered wage. 1982, the minimum wage then was $3.75. I was making $2.50 plus tips, which is ridiculous. How long ago was that? And it was $2.50, and the federal one is still under that. I just have to say, I just think it's insane. That's my comment.
It's inhumane. So, I want to shift the conversation a little bit and talk about COVID and how COVID really helped to highlight the inequity within the labor force. We have this rising discrepancy in wages, this income kind of gap, this wealth gap that's just been increasing over time. And in October, I believe it was, you have economists calling October like Striketober. So it was October of last year because 4.5 million people quit their jobs. And a lot of it was, COVID really highlighted to people, there's a lot of inequity here in my job around safety, around pay. I'm not going to be forced to expose myself to COVID instead of being able to work from home. And to kind of talk a little bit about some history related to this, which is interesting. So this actually this is what economists are saying, is that there's been more emphasis on the importance of labor and unions now than since the 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was something that became kind of this idealized kind of idea in our country called the golden age of American labor, where they really kind of reinforced to people that you should try to get one job, stay in one job, and retire in one job. And it's interesting because that actually wasn't really happening. People were quitting their jobs a lot more in the 70s and the 60s than they are now. In the 1980s, that slowed down and people started to stick with jobs that had crappy wages, crappy benefits, because we as a country don't have a safety net. We don't have adequate kind of social policies and programs. But when people were quitting more and leaving jobs that weren't paying well in the 70s and 60s, it was better for our economy. So anyway, that's some history that I thought was really interesting. I want to pose a question to all of you around this kind of Great Resignation. How have you seen your work with employers or with workers kind of change during COVID? what kind of cultural changes are you seeing happening?
Hi, this is Beatrice. I'll speak to that. So I think first off, the pandemic has really ripped off the veil that has hidden the toxicity of our values around work, money, careers, right? Even our allegiance to our industries that we're in. And, right now we are seeing unprecedented numbers of people going to therapy, talking about mental health, talking about wellness. People are leaving companies, particularly in companies that don't serve them well. People are more focused on taking care of themselves and realigning their lives, their everyday lives, with their true values. And, with employers, what I'm seeing is they are scrambling right now. They're scrambling to keep productivity at an all-time high, because that has really dropped, especially with the workforce, the numbers of people at work reducing significantly. But employers are also more open than ever to putting their money where their mouth is, right? Meaning they are willing to invest in their employees in different ways by scaling their existing incentive-based programs for their employees, expanding their policies to give more flexibility to their employees. But also from an employee perspective, individuals are really re-looking at, reevaluating their own sense of what brings them joy and what gives them a sense of being fulfilled and safe and grounded. And, I think on one end, there's the Great Resignation, but then on the other end, there's this great boom of entrepreneurs, right? People that are realizing I can take my skills. If I'm a consultant at a company, I can take these same skills and offer this service without the stress of an employer, without them breathing down my throat, without not being able to take time off, right? And be able to leverage my skills, my knowledge, my resources to do this on my own with less stress, and maybe I'll live a little longer, right? I mean, this is really how people are beginning to think. It's very practical, very no nonsense. And, I think a lot of employers are thinking that employees are making emotional decisions, but they're not. What has happened is they're taking their emotions out of it and they're looking at their value system. And they realize that their employers are not lining up with their value system. So they're either seeking employers that are more in line with their value system, or they're finding other opportunities or means to make money and take care of themselves, and it's still in a way that will create a sense of balance and joy for them in their everyday life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and just say on same question, different response, is what we're seeing is more businesses interested in selling their businesses to the employees as a way to shift, like sort of planning for the future. They put in blood, sweat, and tears building their companies, and they want that legacy to live on, and they want to reward their employees. Just as a note, 68% of most businesses have no succession plan. So that's something that they are starting to think about, where there's a little bit of dent in sort of shifting. The pandemic sort of set that in motion. So it was a combination of people wanting an alternative to exactly what Beatrice is talking about, and sometimes, many cases, the business owners. I'm not talking the corporate side, the big ones. I'm talking about the medium, small to medium ones that have still maybe mom and pop, or just one generation, two generations, still close enough that they can remember the work of their family members to make it get where it is, and then selling to the employees. So that's one shift that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, in our own market as well as national markets. The second side of that is there's a lot more interest and a lot more resources, both from funders, actually some corporate funders, the foundation community, and socially active folks that want to invest in funds that help create more at scale. They have created funds in Colorado, for example, where they created a giant co-op, purchased a lot of the flailing restaurants, right, that went down during the pandemic, under the guise of a giant cooperative, so that they keep what they each has their individuality there, but they aggregate everything. So the HR, all the things that really are the costs of a business can be aggregated, and you can get those economies of scale, and they're rolling that out. So there's much more funds involved in that. We're trying to partner with one of those so that we make sure we've got that by our side. In Michigan, there are already some funds that exist in our ecosystem, but very few. Michigan is not real progressive. So we're sort of behind overall from a business community of taking this on and a policy, but that's what I'm seeing. So more money to invest so that businesses can, we can get to scale. So that's what we're seeing anyway.
That's fascinating. Dwayne, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think for us, what COVID forced us to look at as an employer and an entity is how are we going to shift, and it heightened the technology gap and the digital divide that we know is out there. So as we move to remote work, you know, there were employees that were on our team that had access issues because they had spotty internet service in the area where they live and couldn't access sort of high speed. One that didn't have a laptop to be able to do and didn't have one through work. So what we did as an employer is we said, well, we know working from home is for many people an increased cost because you've got utilities. If you turn your heat down when you go to work in the winter, and now you have to keep it on all day and connect, perhaps upgrade your internet. So we offered what we call a technology stipend to our employees to help sort of bridge the gap and to recognize that it is an increased cost for them to work at home. And what we had to do for our fellowship, same thing. Our fellowship previously was in person, you know, a couple of days a month. So we moved to a Zoom format for our fellowship sessions, and the benefit of that was it allowed us to broaden our scope. So in last year we had fellows, you know, 5 from Benton Harbor, we had 6 or 7 people from Saginaw, people from all over the state that wouldn't have been able to participate on an in-person basis. But again, it highlighted for a lot of people, we had to expand and offer some people assistance in getting a stronger internet connection or furnishing them a tablet so that they could, you know, connect and be able to show their face on the Zoom session. So I think, yeah, COVID really forced us to look at how we do our work and to recognize that for a lot of reasons, I mean, emotionally, and for all the reasons that Beatrice talked about, I mean, it was a stressful time, but just highlighting some of the other challenges that people have, you know, not to mention childcare and other issues related to the pandemic. And the other thing, I'll just highlight what I said, I think in my introduction, is I think COVID really broadened the notion of who really is an essential worker, and you talk about the CEOs and all that they do, but it really lifted up, you know, frontline workers, people that truck drivers and logistic people that work in the logistics and warehousing and retail people and grocery store workers, et cetera. People that are really on the front line, it really elevated them, and I think the opportunity for us now is to continue that discussion and say, yeah, if they were important then, they're important now as we start to come out of COVID, and we still have to extend the same care and consideration to them now as we did then, because for a lot of people, it's not over.
Mm-hmm. And I like doing how you talk about, like, even though we've shifted the way we work during COVID, there's still inequity, right? And we have to think about people who disproportionately may not have access to the internet or childcare. And then those will become new kind of obstacles within the workforce. I want to jump back quickly to some of the changes that COVID, the slide will kind of, the Great Resignation, COVID has helped to highlight is wages right now are rising faster than they have ever since the Great Recession, which is around 2007, 2008. So that shows also that, like, there is people power. People have power, right? And there's also this kind of this cultural shift, I think, that some corporations and organizations are realizing, and they're doing things like a shift to a 4-day work week. Have any of you seen that in any of the companies that you work with, and what are some of the benefits of that?
I have not seen that in any of the companies that I'm particularly working with, but I do have family and friends who work with companies that have shifted to that 4-day work week. And I have not met anyone yet that does not love that model. It makes sense to them. It empowers them to have more of a work-life balance. And honestly, what I've seen, particularly with people and within my inner circle, is that, that extra day off, typically employers would have allowed some companies allowed employees to take one mental health day a month, right? I mean, that's something that's standard within some companies, even pre-COVID. But what you would see was when people would take that day off, they would flood that day with running errands and doing all these other things, right? But now that culture is shifted to a 4-day work week, you see that employees are actually using that time to really relax, wind down, not completely overthrow their day with stuff to do, quote unquote. And so, yeah, I definitely think that it's a positive change that is making a difference on the individual level. Yeah, I'm happy about that.
Me too.
This is Dwayne. I will just add, I definitely agree, but I think oftentimes it's used for the benefit of the employer, not the employee. For instance, my nephew works for one of the big three, and he works a 4-day week, but it's the schedule is that he works Friday and Saturday, he works the day shift. Sunday and Monday, he works the afternoon shift, and he constantly talks about, and the company does it because they can have people to fill in and they can sort of even out. They don't have to pay overtime. They don't have to hire as many people because they can fill in those weekend gaps. For him, it's really not, I mean, he likes the fact that he has, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off, but it takes him recovery time. And he says, it's taking a toll on him because of the way that the schedule is set up, working 2 days in the morning and then, a quick break and after. So yeah, it is beneficial for a lot of employees, and it's a cost saving measure for many employers, also, particularly in manufacturing.
But like you uplifted again, Dwayne, there's still inequity, right? Even how some of these policies are implemented. Karen, go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't identify a particular one that's adopted it. I know in the progressive nonprofit community that our organization, we think of ourselves as part of that. There is a lot of that movement going on in that arena, which is an interesting thing because nonprofits are always struggling, but they figure out a way. But with some of the cooperatives and the community-based enterprises that we have been working with, because of the fact that they've already organized themselves, it's not even thought about the same way. Yes, they actually are thinking about all of these ideas that are coming in, but if you're doing it well, you're already working in a way that makes sense for your businesses. And one of the things I'll just share, I am part of the board of one organization that's a co-op, and on the board notes that go out, this is a for-profit company, co-ops are for-profit. The first page of all of the board book was all about care for the workers. That's what a co-op can do. It's right there on the front. It was like the top highest priority. The bottom line stuff was like number 3 on the agenda in terms of financial bottom line, because there's a clear understanding that all these issues that we're talking about are critical to that bottom line. So there's just more agency to actually organize in a way that just makes sense for workers and profitability. That's just the whole point. So I just wanted to lift that up, but no, I can't speak to the 4 days specifically.
But again, I think that all of you have lifted up like when we have more agency in how our workplace treats us, what it's doing and focusing on, it always ends up being a better environment for employees and probably for employers, right? Beatrice, do you want to add to that?
I did actually. So I wanted to just throw in this that I think is unique to the mental health population. So therapists in particular who are in private practice have actually adopted this 4-day work week for themselves. They're business owners, but they also serve communities, right? And individuals. So a lot of clinicians you've seen have gone to 4-day or sometimes even 3-day work weeks. And they're still working full-time hours for what will be considered full-time for a clinician, but they're getting all of that work in less days so they can have more time for recovery, more family time, to create more of a work-life balance for themselves. The pandemic really, I mean, we were slammed, right? So yeah, I definitely want to throw that one in there. So if you're having a hard time getting in with your therapist, it's probably because they reduced their work days.
Yeah. So first I want to thank you all. You've all provided such amazing insight and information, and we will be sharing the resources about your organization, your work, and other things that were mentioned with all the participants on this call afterward. I want to now open it up to some questions from the audience. So let me just go to the chat. And I believe, Angie, you had a question. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when people talk about 4-day work weeks or 3-day work weeks, usually it's with much longer days than a 5-day work week. So I was kind of wondering about if there's research showing that productivity levels for like 4 9-hour days are comparable to 5 8-hour days or something like that, that, kind of same overall pay.
This is Dwayne. I'm not really familiar with any research that's shown, but just personally, 4 10s on a regular basis would be difficult for me. My productivity definitely starts to wane after about 7 8 hours.
Right.
I mean, go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say that there is data during the pandemic for employee-owned and worker-owned companies showing that they're more resilient. It's not specific to the 4 hours, but they definitely show that how they were able to maintain a level of profitability and not lay everybody off by altering in agreement how folks worked, when they worked, who was prioritized. And so one of the, on an international scale, over in Spain, there's a Mondragon, which you may or may not have heard of. It's a province of Spain that has an incredible cooperative ecosystem. Everything is wrapped up in co-op. They have $1 trillion businesses that are worldwide in scope, and very few people. There was no laying off. It was they brought during the pandemic everything down, right? So that people were all working less hours. So everybody maintained the jobs. They weren't like in the United States, we just laid people off. People just, no, they just brought everything down, right? And then they decided who would be the prioritized, if you've got kids or whatever. They figured all that out with thousands of employees. We're talking thousands of employees, and didn't miss a beat. And did not. It's a $1 trillion industries. It's multiple industries. And out of all of those businesses, only one businesses out of all of them went out of business during the pandemic. All the rest of them did okay. And it's worldwide. It's been lifted up over and over again. It's like, if you change how you think about it during these bad times, you can do better by messing with those hours and figuring it out and just bring it down and not just laying off a whole crew of folks. I wish, I have data on that. I can send that out.
That would be great. Are there any other questions or comments from the audience? We're going to kind of open it up now, or from our panelists. I think I see one. See one in the chat.
I see this question from Mackenzie. What are your views on requiring paid/stipend field placements for social work students? That is a huge one. So I just have to throw in the shameless plug. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan School of Social Work. And yeah, I think that is extremely important. Even for myself in private practice, whenever I have interns that come in that are wanting to do clinical work or group work, I pay them. I pay them for their time, right? I think that is extremely important because the work that we're doing is important, and we're also shifting the trajectory of individual lives, right? And when we shift the trajectory of one person's life, that ripples over to their family, to their community. And so I'm huge on that. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox, but I'm happy that students are petitioning for this. I think it's very important that that happens for us.
Well, if you're stepping down, I'll step on your soapbox and say I absolutely agree. And that's one of the other things that we did. Our fellowship has always been a paid fellowship. Our stipend was $1,000 for participants. But one of the things that we did when we went virtual 2 years ago was to say, well, we're not incurring facilities costs for the in-person sessions. We're not incurring food costs because we always provided food and childcare for the fellowship. So let's take those dollars that we're saving and increase the stipend to, again, enable more people to more fully participate. So we increased our stipend last year to $1,500, which will stay again. And I think that's one, it's appreciated by the fellows, obviously, but then it helps them to know that we value their participation and the time that they're making signing on to Zoom, every Saturday for 3 hours when they could be doing any number of other things.
And it sets, worker expectations, right? When a type of worker is used to or expects a certain type of wage or lack of a certain type of treatment, it also helps to shape kind of societal attitudes about a profession, right? Are there any other questions from the audience? I think someone's raised their hand.
Yeah, I have a question. So I've been thinking a lot about, and this kind of goes back to the chicken and the egg conversation that happened earlier. Sorry, my name is Autumn. I use she, her pronouns. And I think about like the toxicity in the work culture, even when policies are in place. So like we talked about the Paid Medical Leave Act. I'm just speaking from personal experience of like, even when these things are in place, there's like this shame or guilt for using things like paid sick leave and things like that. And like, I'm wondering how we switch the culture around that. Like, even if we are switching policy, I don't know. I've had really bad personal experiences with that, and my husband has as well. And so I'm just curious what you all think about that.
I'll just say that I think I started off early talking about the two types of institutions that protect workers' rights are unions and then employee ownership. I think it's just really critical to use those levers, those institutions. I think when you're talking about the employee or the worker in a business, and you're looking at that well-being, it shifts the conversation. Right now, the pandemic has put the power back into the hands for the right now. And we'll see how long this lasts. It's an opportunity for either, again, more unionization to put pressure, because it's really always going to be a pressure against the business interests and the working folks' interest, right? That's just how the pendulum goes. So it's an opportunity now to think about a union approach or thinking about an employee ownership approach, both of them. Back again, chicken and egg. And I know I'm sort of a kind of a broken record here, but you have to use one of those levers to get there. And that helps push the whole union piece is what made us even think about how we think about time today. It's time to reinvigorate that with all these conversations. So that becomes part of it on both sides.
Yeah, this is Beatrice. I would just really piggyback off of what Karen said. I agree with everything that she said. And I would also add to that for those of us who are in leadership positions within our organizations, our businesses, I believe that this is a change. Policy necessarily, I don't think it's going to change this, right? I think that it will give a push to incentivize it, but it's the individuals who have power to influence policy that are going to help shift the pendulum. So for those of us that are in positions of influence within our organizations, if you have an employee or if you have a colleague that's taken time off, I think it's important for us to be mindful about how we respond to that, right? If an employee is taking time off to take care of their child or to have a child, right? Sometimes employees get upset that their colleague is taking all this time off and now the work is on them, right? I think it's important the way we handle each other when we do need to take that necessary time off. I think that it has to start at the individual level, because each of us, even outside of our managers or the business owners, we also impact our workplace culture. And so I think that, it has to be this incremental change that happens on an individual level to create this energy of support and autonomy for people to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and we talked about the importance of labor before. For those of you who may not know, the labor movement is responsible for why we have 40-hour work weeks, for why we have the weekends, for why we don't have children who are in the labor market. And it's important for us to continue supporting them. So I think there's some more questions in the chat. So I'm gonna allow, I think Flynn, you had a question if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm doing clinical work for Corktown Health right now, and I'm noticing a lot of really interesting dynamics between like the administrative leadership of the nonprofit organization and then the behavioral health team. So I'm curious if anyone knows of any like nonprofit mental health agencies in the US that are practicing more anti-oppressive models, or if it's kind of like Corktown where there's this like split between ideologies in departments within nonprofits.
I don't know of any. I will be curious, Flynn, to hear maybe a little bit more about what that split or what that difference is that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little more. I think it's more ideological. Like the administration doesn't have a social work background, right? They're not, they don't really know much about the behavioral health side. They're more business minded. And then the behavioral health team is led completely by social workers. So I think it's an ideological split that's really happening there. But I think it's interesting that like my department is doing a really great job of centering anti-oppressive values, while our supervisor is kind of struggling with balancing that with our leadership, right? So I'm really curious about how we can better create partnerships with leadership to really make our point as social workers like more validated by our leadership.
I'll throw out that in the cooperative world, there's a lot of sociocracy. It's just a way of making decisions, is one tool that could be maybe brought into the place about how the decisions are made in the first place. And so it's just a way to engage folks in the conversation. Again, it gets back to that agency piece, because who's making the decisions and for whom, that's the question. There's no simple thing, but it's just another tool about how you make decisions that impact everyone and gives different people in the organization a voice. We actually use it as the way we do our own business in our nonprofit, and it comes out of the employee-owned world.
Flynn, I like to speak to that as a social worker, but also as a business owner as well. I think that it will require a collaborative approach and being able to look at it from both lenses. So the administration seeing it not only from a business lens, but also from a social work lens, right? We can put on and take off lenses, right? So I think it would be helpful for the administration to do that, but I also think it's also imperative for social workers to do that as well. When I shifted more into an entrepreneurial business role, I realized how much of a gap that there was. And you're right, Flynn, that there is a difference in the way that social workers think and people that lead businesses think. But I think as social workers, we can have so much more power if we can put on that other lens, right? Because it will shift the way we are offering services. But I also think that we can really tailor our solutions even more to help the communities that we're impacting. If we can put on a different lens, I really do think that we could really, we can really make a huge difference. And so again, just in short, I think that a collaborative approach with both with both parties putting on each other's lenses to see it from both perspectives so that both parties can get on one accord for the greater good.
Thanks so much. So I'm gonna call on Professor Julie Roboto, who has her hand up, and this will be our last question. Julie, if you want to go ahead.
Great, thank you. All right, this is not well articulated. Oh, I'm a mess. I've been in meetings all day and haven't even looked. First of all, Flynn, I loved your question, and I always love hearing from you. I love this panel. I so appreciate your energy and insight and wisdom. One of the things I worry about in the School of Social Work is that sometimes I feel like the tail wags the dog. Like, how do we, Beatrice, for you especially coming out of the U of M School of Social Work, are we teaching about how to help social workers advocate for themselves in the business environment? We teach people to expect low wages, high work hours. Like, how do we shift the mentality even in the School of Social Work? What would you have expected to hear now that you're out of the school and an entrepreneur and a mental health professional that would have helped you on this path sooner?
Yeah, I think possibly making it mandatory for every social work student to take a course in the School of Business, or even having a social work professor teaching a course about business entrepreneurship, or even understanding the business side of running and managing a nonprofit. As social workers, even therapists that are in private practice, nobody wants to talk about money. It's almost, you're shamed if you talk about money in our profession, because it's like, how are you talking about money? You're supposed to just help people, right? But we have to live, and we have to be able to take care of ourselves and take care of our families. And so I think encouraging these conversations are going to be important, because I think, at least for myself and many other of my social work colleagues, we have blocks around money. We have a lot of blocks around money that inhibits our ability to ask for more, to really be able to actualize and be clear about our value, right? And put that in monetary terms and be willing to walk away. I think the other piece, I think it's great that the social work students are petitioning for paid internships, for paid internships. I think that it should be more of a norm for the students to look for internships that are going to pay them. You know, I think we should get in the field or that normalize the idea that we're going to get paid and get paid well. A lot of people don't even know that therapists in private practice do very well, but no one wants to talk about that part of it either, right? So I think having more conversations about money for social work students, I think, would be important.
Thank you. I mean, I think you're pushing the envelope and even being able to talk about private practice in a School of Social Work. When I first joined U of M's School of Social Work, that was like a dirty word, private practice. And yet it's one of the few places that social workers, you know, other than academia, and I am very privileged to make money, but I was poor until I came to the School of Social Work. So
yeah, thank you for
objectively living wage poor. Yeah. Okay, thank you. You encourage me to press ahead with this. So.
Yes.
Well, you know, I want to thank you all, and we're going to close out our session just in a few minutes. I think this has been a really amazing conversation. And I think, you know, in closing, it sounds like what we really need to kind of question and think about is our cultural attitudes towards things, right? There isn't policy change yet. Corporations may not change on their own, but we need to think about, why do we value only having one job when what it benefits is employers, right? And we know it actually benefits the economy if you quit a job that pays you low wages. Why do we expect as social workers to be paid less and work more? So question those attitudes. So I want to thank you all again for joining us, and we'll send out resources on your various organizations. And in the meantime, if the students of the Engaged Community class could stay on, we're going to have a quick Q&A session with the panelists. And now, Trina, I'm going to hand it back over to you if you want to talk about our next session.
All right, next slide, or whoever you get to the last slide. Okay, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank our panelists. So Dwayne, Karen, Beatrice, great discussion. Thanks for keeping these issues at the fore and helping us all learn a little bit. So we appreciate each of you. And if we ask you to come again, hopefully you will, to tell all the new things you're up to. If you ever want to see any of our past sessions, the link is here, and I think someone's going to put it in the chat. We've been doing this since the start of the pandemic, so I think this is our 4th semester now. So you can look at a lot of great discussions that have taken place. It's possible that you can get field credit for these sessions, but you have to talk to your field faculty to get the credit. We can't give it to you anymore, but if you ask them and tell them that you've been part of this, it can count to your field hours. And then, of course, in next month, our next session is going to be February 17th, same time, same place. And it's going to be about Michigan's BIPOC elected officials paving the way. So we're going to have a lot of our newly elected officials who are people of color to talk about that process. So stay tuned and please join us on the 17th. I think that is it. So everyone else who isn't part of the class can sign off, but thank you very much for your participation. And again, as Aisha said, this will be put on our website. They'll send notes and all the references and things are put in the chat so that you'll hear from us again soon. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.